Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Embroidery Nerds Digitizing 911 with our very own Matthew Enderley from Patchphrase. We've got Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios, and I'm Jeff from the Embroidery Nerd. We're right here. We're actually out from the Embroidery Nerd. So today we have a Digitizing 911. We got it was a question in the group, right, Justin?
Yeah, there was a post in the group about a file that one of our members was having some issues with a 3D puff design, and I was happy enough to help him out, and we can go through what we discovered and what the results are.
Okay, hold on for 1 second here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because it's up right now, and I have the picture that was shared. Boom. So there we go. That was the output that they were getting on a 3D puff file. It looks 3D puff. And they were getting a lot of that opened in the wrong browser. But we'll bring it over here. So they were getting bird nesting on the back. Yes. So it's kind of nice to actually, when you guys are having problems and you're asking questions in group for help, having the back, a picture of the back of the embroidery along with the front of the embroidery is really helpful. Because you can see, like just looking at it here, you can see that there's a couple of little tension things that are going on that are contributing, but there are also some file things that were also contributing to it as well there. So I'll go ahead and remove my screen. And Justin was the one who brought the file. You brought the file. Coordinated this Digitizing 911 episode.
Yeah. So one caveat here, and this just goes to show you all out there that it's not always the digitizer's fault. This particular person was having issues with the file. I did review the file, did see some areas that could be improved. But I mean, in all honesty, even with my file, this particular person was having issues with the bird's nest still after the fact. I helped him through trying some different stuff as far as some trial and error, troubleshooting. He did discover eventually that there was some issues with his machine that he ended up correcting. So between the file itself, I think was just adding to the problems he was having with the machine. So this was one of those situations where it wasn't all just the file. It was both sides of things, and sometimes when you are having problems, you kind of have to kind of isolate the problem and see where it's coming from exactly. You know, especially when you have a multi-head machine. Are the issues happening on all heads? Are they happening on all needles? Because when you can isolate that down, if it's only happening on one needle on one head, then there's a good chance that the problem's only at that source. If there's a problem happening on every head or all heads, and it's the same point in the logo, then you start looking towards the file and see, hey, is there something going on where there's too many stitches in one place, whatever it may be. So
I think another thing really quick too is if it is in the same spot on that design every single time, take a note of what the stitch number is. Because I know I had a design where it looked fine on the computer and everything, but for some reason this certain stitch, it did something weird every single time, and I think it must have added a random function in or something, but it was weird. But if I had that stitch number, I could have just gone in through Wilcom or Pulse or whatever and just pulled out whatever the issue was. But
right, yeah, that's definitely good information, especially when you're talking to your digitizer. I have customers that will send me like kind of up close pictures and with a pen or needle or something like that, pointing at the area that they're having problems with, and even dealing with machine files. You know, maybe Matt can give a little insight on this, but I've seen where a DST file that's been floating around for a while, that's been saved, you know, out of Wilcom the first time by me, and say that that goes from one customer to another customer saved out of Pulse or whatever it is, what software it is. There's a lot of artifacts that get kind of screwy within the file. So it may have been digitized originally correctly, but by the time it gets saved several times or passed around, there might be some extra nodes, some extra stitches or whatever in a certain area, especially when you start getting into real tight corners and stuff that may have been problematic from the get-go. It's going to really add some artifacts in these files that are just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I think, there's a good example of that I have a software that will rip out lock stitches from an opposing software. And it's because every time you save it out, it runs it through their stitch filter, and the lock stitches in the opposing software is shorter stitch length than what it allows. So it pulls them out as short stitches, and there goes all your lock stitches. So it's weird stuff like that can be yanked, pulled, moved.
Right.
But Justin, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Ramona says, a copy of a copy of a copy starts to get blurrier after a bit. And that's
exactly.
If you get from your digitizer, if you don't need to open it in your software, if you get a DST file and you don't need to open it in your software, why open it in your software?
Oops. Both added at the same time. Okay, so this is the original file that I got from this individual. And like the picture that Jeff had up of the original hat, there was definitely the bird's nesting that was a concern. Right off the bat, I saw like registration issues where the border was kind of good on one side of it, and then the hiding up underneath the 3D puff on another side of it. So definitely registration issues with the outline in the 3D puff. Some areas of concern that I saw that were pretty dense as far as a lot of stitches going in small little areas, especially in like the kind of the voided areas of the letters. But let me go do a quick redraw here. As far as kind of the global underlay, this is kind of a thinner design, so getting a full global underlay is kind of difficult, but there is somewhat of a global underlay to kind of tack down that hat, something that I always teach when it comes to hat designs. Let's speed this up a bit. So there wasn't too much of the outline other than maybe some pull compensation that I saw. Areas that overlapping satin stitches, you got to be careful where the two satin stitches are going together. If the edges or the stitch penetrations are falling on each other, that can cause issues where there's going to be thread breaks or needle breaks or bird's nests. So these inner parts here are pretty tight on how they were done. But other than that, not too much in the outline that I saw. First thing that I saw was a lot of underlay when it came to the 3D puff element. I understand what they were doing. They were kind of traveling through and they were kind of setting all their bridges from the get-go. I tend to do a section at a time for registration purposes mostly, and to eliminate this traveling back and forth, because again, more needle penetrations when it comes to 3D puff is something you don't want. So that is something that I try to do, is just try to do a section at a time where I'm setting.
So one thing that I noticed there too, Justin, is that when they did their global underlay, and not their global underlay, they tacked their foam down with all of that, those run stitches, when they were setting all their bridges, is that they were using a short stitch length. And so if you look at their bridges, they actually have a break in the middle of them where it was dropping a stitch, which kind of defeats the point of having a bridge there.
Yeah, what he's saying there is, if you can see these dark areas, it shows in between here is the it's probably it's gonna be hard to see. Stitch penetration, where is that? Yeah, it's gonna be hard to see, but the areas that Jeff is referring to is in the bridges here. The stitch length is a short stitch length, so not only is the travel stitches give really short stitch lengths that are kind of hammering down that foam, but on the bridges, instead of it kind of just connecting these two pieces that a bridge is supposed to, it's actually throwing stitches in between and in tight little spots. So I think that's definitely an area that these bridges are at. They're going to be problematic areas, especially if you see the center point of this design is going to be on your 0 axis right here. So on that center point, anything in the area that's seen, especially on the hats that they were using, I know they were known to have pretty thick seams to them. A lot of needle penetrations going down. So I think that's where a lot of the bird's nests were coming from.
And the bird's nest was in the, like, where the W meets the S, I believe, right?
Yeah, right in here, which, yeah. So just looking at the border itself, there's some areas in here that had some really tight spots, some overlapping satins that seemed like they were laying right on top of each other as far as the edge of the satins where they're going to be actually sewing, and also those really short stitches in the bridges that I think were just.
So Justin, really, if you want to pause it right here.
Yeah.
I'm going to grab a couple of questions. Cindy asked, is the white just regular embroidery?
Yes, it is.
And does it seem like the white embroidery is way too thick, causing issues with the puff?
I don't think this density was an issue. Actually, the density was kind of light.
Yeah.
I think Ramona's suggestion would be a good one too, to change your canvas background to black. It might be a little bit more easier to see when you're in the stitch.
Stitch generator. Okay.
Yeah.
So the other thing that really threw a red flag to me, at least that I saw, was the split stitch that they have going on in there.
Yeah. So, and again, this was I believe, can't remember if this was a native. I guess it was a native EMB file. But yeah, when you are in this true view, anytime you see this darkening areas within a satin stitch itself, that means that satin has the auto split function on. So if you toggle that off, because what that's going to do is it was set to split anything at 3.3 millimeters or higher, it's going to split. So yeah, that's definitely going to be, again, adding stitches within the middle of the satin. And to be perfectly honest, this design in itself, it's pretty much bordering where I always tend to be the minimum as far as width of the satins for 3D puff. If at all possible, I usually try to do satins a little bit more wide. So without completely redesigning the logo for this person, I was trying to work with, keeping the proportions and everything the same, like that was in the original file. But if I were to be digitizing this for somebody, that's something that I would suggest is, hey, let's make this overall a little bit more bold. Maybe push the outlines a little bit more outwards to support that. But anytime you're working with, I know my green screen is going to pick up this picture, but maybe not. It is pretty thin satins for the 3D puff. So it is hard to work with as it is, but my green screen's picking up. I have a picture of that later, I'll show. But yeah, those were the major concerns that I had with the design. Mainly there was a lot of extra stitches because of the stitch lengths, a lot of stitches on top of each other in small little areas. that were the major concern. And one of the other major concerns I saw was there's an end cap right here. If you can kind of see this piece here, there was an end cap that was on top of this satin here at the end of these satins. So, and if you can see, it's falling right smack dab on the seam. So I think that was a problem area right there, that they were probably getting a lot of bird's nests. So, but let's check out my file, shall we?
Yes.
As long as it's better. Greater
That's what
than
we
or
pay
equal
you
to.
for.
All right. So one of the concerns I did have, like I said, the amount of overlap that the outlines are having. If I measure this here, these outlines were poking out barely a millimeter to the sides of the 3D puff. So a lot of times what's going to happen is that once that top layer of the 3D puff sews, it's going to expand out a bit, and it's going to start pushing out past the outlines, because those outlines are also going to pull in with the lack of pull comp or the lack of coverage there. So you're going to have a lot of areas that the outline's going to be hiding up underneath the puff. So. But that was the first thing that I made a adjustment for, was I made the outline a lot more bold and sticking out past the 3D puff to make sure of that coverage. So we'll do a quick slow redraw. So I went center out, bottom to top for the global underlay. Again, making those outlines a bit bolder. Another thing too, on really tight corners, if you can see here, instead of turning this corner like they had a sharp turn corner. A lot of times I'll just use the open end of satins that are going to have the same shape as that kind of a sharp turn corner, but it's not going to have that 90-degree turn when you're trying to have these tight little corners on the edges of the outline. Another thing too is like these areas that, even though technically looking at the logo the way it's designed, you have an inner and an outer border, but the areas, instead of having an inner and outer border, so two separate satin stitches that are going to possibly be sewing on top of each other, these small little areas that are going to be inside the W and the S where they are interlocked, I just do as one satin. So it just covers the area.
All right, Justin, I'm going to grab this question here from Ramona. What was the density of your border and how wide was the puff columns on the second file?
On your file? On my file?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me finish the redraw and I'll take a look. But again, the corners that I saw that they had really sharp corners, that they were trying to turn corners. I utilized just the open ends of satins where they meet. It's going to give the same shape and the same look, but you're putting less stress on those corners. So it's not going to be as heavy in those areas. And again, if you can see here, each section is done in one little section at a time. So the bridges as well as the top stitches are done within the same section. So you're not worried about registration going from top to bottom with all your bridges and coming back down. You're going to have that shift in hat. So if you do it one little section at a time, registration shouldn't be an issue. And another thing too, as well as, kind of try to do the corners a little bit different. Instead of turning really tight corners from this really thin leg of the R, instead of turning just a right turn going straight up, I use kind of a mitered cap on that area.
I'm going to grab this question here for you, Justin, too. Since the white is just outlines, would you consider tatami to have a flatter base to lay the puff on?
There are times where I don't like using tatami fills with edges that aren't finished with a satin. That's just personal preference. I like finishing with a satin. I think they give you a lot cleaner edge to them. But there are times that the way a design is designed, if it has really, really wide outlines, it would be easier just kind of fill the whole area, kind of do a satin border around the perimeter of it, and then you throw the 3D puff on top of that. So as you can see, the design's moving from the bottom up. As it goes up, it's finishing each section. So you're not traveling back and forth as the least amount that you can. The only time I travel is when I have to get to kind of an end to cap it to work its way back just to that section. So that's basically it. So what was Ramona's question? Density of the border?
Density or border and how wide the puff columns are.
Okay. Density of the border, I used a 0.36 with a zigzag underlay. And the widest point of the puff, I'm sorry, the least wide, my software. Was about 2.75 millimeters. So I usually like to go 3 millimeters or higher when it comes to 3D puff. I think it just comes out a little bit cleaner. Another thing too, I was able to, which I can pull up my pictures here. I was able to, those little sections that are kind of in between the W and the S right in here, there's really small sections. So it's not only the satin sizes that you need to worry about as far as when it comes to 3D puff, but the actual voids that it makes as well. So when you're trying to clean out the excess foam, those really, really tight spaces, especially when you're not using a really dense foam, when you're using the ones that are a little bit less dense, they tend to be a little bit more spongy. So just to kind of pop them out with your handy dandy 3D Puff Pro tool or another tool.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
Oh, Matt's even there with the link too.
Oh, there you go.
See, I'm paying attention. I'm taking notes.
Those little void areas can be problematic, especially without the right foam that you're using. So that's one area of the design I would have suggested to the customer to try to maybe extend the width of the letters a little bit to try to open up those little voided areas. And in this case, this is a really hard one because there is kind of a tight area between those two. Oh, one other thing I wanted to point out specifically in this area here, they did have that end cap at the end of these two satins. Now that is necessary if these two satins were floating out here somewhere, they would need an end cap. But because they share the plane of this satin that's going across the bottom there, you don't need an end cap in between. So that's an area that you're really hammering. The density that you're needing for 3D puff, you're really hammering in that area. So let me find the pictures that I have and share those as well. Was there any other questions, Jeff?
There's one from Cindy asking, what size foam did you recommend for this logo?
I actually ran it today, and I ran 3 millimeter foam, which I believe that's what the customer was using.
That you happen to have on your website.
Actually, I don't. I'm all sold out.
Oh, it's sold out, but I shared the link anyways because,
Thank you.
Why not? But go to the website. It's still great.
Check it out. All right, so these are just some pictures of the hat that I ran today. So it just kind of shows you the global underlay, that you see, and then it comes back and does the satin stitch like you were seeing in the slow redraw. Let's see here. So this is where it's going to look where you have to stop in the machine or in the file to make sure you can add the foam. So that's one thing that some customers ask for, an actual stop code in the file. I particularly like doing it on the machine. I think it's easier adding stop codes where I want when it comes to Tajima. It's a really simple thing to do in the needle sequence, the color sequence when you add to the machine. So yeah, this is where you'd want to add the foam, because you put all down the flat stitches first. I always use the rubber band technique, where I secure the piece of foam to the hat and put a strong, thick rubber band where the crown meets the bill. Make sure that it is out of your sewing area, so you don't sew over that rubber band. But I found this is the most secure way of holding down foam. And of course, this is where it's doing the top stitches for the 3D puff. And I purposely used kind of a high contrast. I wanted to keep it close to what they were originally doing as far as the gold, but I did pick a darker gold just so you can kind of see the contrast in the foam and the puff. Because as you can see there, you're definitely gonna have some cleanup afterwards. You can kind of see these little areas where there's a little bit of foam that's popping out, and these were those areas that I was concerned about, the really small triangles that you need to pop out. This one's a little bit easier to pop out, especially when you have that handy dandy tool. But yeah, you're gonna definitely have these little tiny little things that you're gonna have to push in for cleanup, as well as using your heat gun to shrink up. One hot tip that I actually discovered today, that if you do have the handy dandy tool that I keep mentioning, if you are using your heat gun, if you do the heat gun first and then use the tool, actually the foam starts softening up just a bit after that heat gun. So if you are pushing in any areas, it is easier to push in with the tool after the heat gun. So kind of bouncing back and forth between your heat gun and the 3D Puff Pro tool does really, really good for you. But as you can see, there's little corners that are usually the culprits as far as the foam sticking out. But after the cleanup, as you can see, it came out pretty good. And so the areas where the outline, it's pretty universal. I can maybe edit this area in here, but the registration's better. Not a single bird's nest. Pretty much ran perfectly on my Tajimas today. And that would be the end result. Yes, it is a nice Tajima.
Unbiased opinion. You're not sponsored by Tajima.
Yes. So yeah, like I said, the individual, after getting my design, was having some problems still with the bird's nest. I was able to. He runs Barradin machines. A friend of mine here in town that runs Barradins was nice enough to run the file on his machine, just to kind of duplicate the environment. Because there are times where I'll even throw it at Jeff and say, "Hey, do me a favor, can you run this and see if there's any issues that you see?" Or I'll run it on the Tajimas that are here on my Tajimas here. And see if I can duplicate the issues. But there is times where machine to machine, brand to brand, one might run a design better than the other. So I was trying to kind of duplicate the same environment that he was having the problems. Came down to that he did find some issues with the bobbins and whatnot, and the bobbin casings. So I messaged him earlier today, and it sounds like he was able to finish up the job, get his machine squared away. So that's good news.
All right, Justin, I'm going to grab a question here from Cindy where it says, did you lose your outline at the bottom of the R?
It's a little bit at the bottom. I think it's the camera angle as well, because I'm looking at the hat right now. But that is, again, the way it ran on my machine. At the bottom of outlines on hats, I tend to, on my machine anyways, I tend to overcompensate because it seems like at the bottom where it's closer to the bill, it does for whatever reason doesn't register as well. So if this was something that was in my production, I would make that adjustment. But yes, Cindy, good eye.
Awesome. All right, let me go ahead and hit some buttons here. We'll go to that layout. So looks like we might be getting out of here a little bit early today. Didn't take as much time as I thought it would.
No.
It was a good design. Good recovery and execution of it.
So awesome. Well, if you guys have questions, make sure you ask them. You can ask them in the group or you can ask them in our Discord channel. You can find all of the links to all of our social medias at links.embnerd.com, I do believe. Matt will put it in the chat, and I'll throw him up on spot there. So you can check it out there, as well as you can join our Facebook group. If you're not a part of our Facebook group, make sure you go and request to join. You do have to answer all of the questions. Coming up, I don't think that we have anything crazy coming up. I don't know if you have any announcements, Justin.
Got some stuff in the works, but nothing I could officially announce
Divulge.
right now.
All right.
But we always have something going on behind the scenes, so I'm sure something new and cool and exciting we get to announce here soon. So, but if you do have a file that you're pulling your hair out and you've edited or sent back to your digitizer, hopefully it's not me. But send it our way for Digitizing 911. We'll take a look at it, see if we can pick it apart and see what the problems are. I know this individual said he tried to work on it, so he had some knowledge as far as digitizing. And again, I don't want to slam him or talk bad about anybody's files, but sometimes there's those files just don't do what you want, and need another pair of eyes to look at, and or 3 pairs of eyes to look at, and so we can take a look at it and help you out.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, with that, everybody, I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. We have Matthew Enderley from Patch Phrase and the amazing Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios, owner of 3dpuffprotools.com. Shameless plug. And we are all here representing the Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we'll catch you next time.
Good night, everybody.
See you guys.